One young man was helping the other to the bed, while asking the blonde man to stay awake, for there was only a little bit left. The brunette helped his acquaintance to lie down, but he was sure it was best to go to the hospital now. But the blonde said he would lie down here, as it was impossible to go to the hospital. The brunette was angry, as he had spent a lot of effort and energy to help his acquaintance to the bed, and he was acting like a girlfriend to him. But the blonde was really bad. His body was burning with fire, he had no strength and was terribly thirsty. So the brunette decided to bring him water, and then with a calm soul to go about his business. But the blonde man had other plans for this situation. And from somewhere he got strength and fell the new acquaintance on the bed and pinned him down, saying that he understood perfectly well that he helped him not out of kindness, but wanted from him the same thing as the guys downstairs who molested him. Now anger took the blonde, because he noticed that this man did not take his eyes off him and saw perfectly well that he was using. And now he was playing the unattractive and caring mother. And since it was so, he should take responsibility for him to the very end. A few hours before this moment, the brunette had been sitting downstairs at a party, drinking a little alcohol and dreaming of going home, since he was usually already resting at this time. The supervisor texted him every 5 minutes and demanded to keep a very close eye on the target. The guy got angry and decided to take a photo of the obscene gesture and send it to the supervisor. Up to this moment, the chief had not been so eager in his words, for the man had always done his work well. But today it was different, and looking around, he could not get used to what he saw. There were a lot of different rich kids here, but one that stood out in the background was Crystal, a young girl who was afraid of nothing and no one, was modeling, and had influence over young people all over the country. But the target was not her, but her uncle Dominic, who was a well-known figure on the black market and sold very rare and expensive items, such as a red diamond. Jay was going crazy over the item and had been forcing the brunette to do everything possible to find it for the past year or so, when suddenly a man walked past him and pushed him so hard that he almost choked on his drink. The men that pushed the brunette had bad plans for a man named Tae-oh. They wanted to get him drunk, induce him into intimacy, and then videotape it and blackmail him. Our agent 008 did not expect such courage from the guys, because although the blonde was considered a lousy sheep in the family of Janssen groups, but it was more expensive to get in touch with them. The brunette talked himself out of meddling in other people's affairs, as his own were over his head. But suddenly he saw T.O. drinking the drink offered to him. Agent 008 turned away, but in doing so, he could hear the companionship about to take the guy's phone away and engage in obscenities. But the moment the bad man decided to duck into T.O.'s room, he was punched by a brunette. The man decided to help the blonde by saying that he was his partner, so he didn't understand what the company had in mind to do to him. The brunette could see everything from his seat, and now he was giving the group a chance to escape and avoid trouble. But they probably still didn't understand what was going on. But the brunette's good intentions were not appreciated, and one of the company of guys decided to attack him. And since Agent 008 was already in a bad mood, he twisted his opponent and almost broke his arm. Once the brunette was done with the bandits, he wanted to take Teo to the hospital, but the latter refused and asked to be taken to the Yongseong Hotel, as they would be given the key immediately if they went to the front desk. So, Yan Tae-oh was the youngest son of the Yongseon group, but he didn't compete with his older sisters for power and only headed a small branch of the company while actively promoting himself in various media. No one expected that this guy would turn out to be a brilliant racer who would achieve a huge number of victories in competitions, including international ones. For all that, the brunette didn't know anything about this guy, which was why he was in this strange position. Tae-oh knew quite a bit about Cha Gong-mu, but where it came from was an interesting question. The brunette had some guesses, but for now he decided to play dumb. Gong-mu was trying to get through to Tae-oh's mind, saying that they both didn't need this right now, and that if he couldn't go to the hospital, his family doctor could be called here to help and examine him. This attempt failed, and the blonde man, saying that even though he had taken the forbidden remedy, he still knew exactly what he was doing. The blonde knew exactly what he wanted. But if Chon-mu was against it, he could hit him like those guys in the bar downstairs. Except the brunette had too much to drink and his brain started working too slowly, so he didn't immediately realize what the blonde was doing and looked at him like Harry Potter appearances to muggles. It had started out innocently enough, but now Tae-oh had been active for hours on end, and he was still going strong. as if he had drunk not alcohol but fuel for a perpetual motion machine. It was morning. Gongmu was sitting on the balcony smoking. He had been sneaking into these bohemian parties for 2 years now, but never once did he think he would be in a situation like this. The man hoped it was a one-off, but he was well aware that To was not only famous, he even managed to sleep beautifully. The strange thing was that the man remembered his name, even though he tried not to make it public. Agent 008's whole body was aching now. He didn't realize if it was the illegal substances or the natural stamina of his nocturnal friend. The brunette wanted to leave quickly, so he woke the blonde man and he made them coffee and they sat in silence and drank the beverage. So, Mr. Chan was about to leave, as he had more business to attend to today. But before he did, he decided to take stock of what had happened between them during the night. It was interesting, as Mr. Yongseong thought the brunette had already left, and the latter was beginning to boil over from such politeness, as the guy didn't act as cultured at night as he did now. The fact that Teo wasn't even going to give him a chance to say anything was also offensive, considering him no better than the bunch at the bar that had gotten him drunk last night. Gongmu admitted that he was uncomfortable being here, because the blonde man thought he was a self-serving type who looked to benefit himself in helping others, and he was generally going to leave, but Teo himself wouldn't let him. Nevertheless, the blonde thought that Mr. Chan was very lucky that they had resolved everything in the hotel room, because otherwise the legal department of the Yongseong group would have accused him of various deadly sins, and in general the brunette could now go while leaving his phone number. Gongmu left his phone number, but he hoped the two of them would forget the night and day like a bad dream, because he didn't need anything from the blonde for his help. Afterward, the brunette proudly left the room, while feeling contemptuous after this conversation. At that moment, young So-na came to meet her brother. She said that he could have called her personally instead of calling her through the manager, and it would be better if he didn't smoke, and even if he does, he should take care of privacy. Except it wasn't the blonde who was smoking, and her sister believed it, since she knew the only thing her brother valued was his body. The man told Sonae that he was treated to illegal substances yesterday by the guys who closed their business at her hotel, wanted to get to her through him. The girl said she would investigate herself and sent her brother to the hospital. He didn't realize if it looked so bad that everyone was sending him to the doctor. To this, Sona didn't answer anything, but asked Teo to be careful and sit this time out since his mother had instructed his older sister to follow him. Meanwhile, Gongmu had come to meet Jae, who was already waiting for him at his secret base. The brunette didn't look happy either, and said that it was Jae's own fault that he was late, since he'd made him work all night when normal people slept. And in general, you should be looking after your health, not this stuff. Jae really hoped that their future operation would go well, and Gongmu wouldn't draw any attention to himself before then. But before all their plans had been thwarted just because the brunette walked where he shouldn't have, and now they were going to negotiate and check the route once more. Crystal was just doing a commercial. Dominic didn't have a clear schedule, but Jae had already hacked into the security system and now had everything under control. So he asked the brunette to take the job seriously, because if anything went wrong, he would make his life a living hell. Agent 008 now realized that he had been wrong to get involved with Jae years ago. He needed to get as far away from him as possible, and as fast as possible. Gongmu was going into business and realized that the situation around him had gotten very heated at the time he met Jae, so he didn't think much about it and accepted his employer's offer. He had been betrayed by a close friend, and the business that had come his way had failed, so now he was angry at himself and his short-sightedness. The man was aware that if he did not organize the affairs of the past days in his head, it would come back to haunt him today. Jae, on the other hand, was pissed off by his coworkers' lack of focus, since they needed to leave for the point in an hour, and Gongmu still hadn't packed and was standing there sighing. So Jae explained all the steps of Gongmu's plan once again, and then they drove to the site and were going to enter the building under the guise of electricians. Since this building also had the offices of ordinary mortals, the guard on the first floor should have let them pass through without a problem. Jae then had to turn off the electricity in Dominic's office and signaled to Gongmu that the way was clear and safe. Thus, the first stage of the plan was accomplished. Jae sat down on the stairs and began to coordinate the further process through his laptop. Gongmu arrived at his point on time as well. The brunette was about to go down. He didn't expect it to be so high up there, so he said he would be down in about 3 minutes at the earliest. After making all the necessary preparations, The young man went downstairs with the speed of a Spider-Man on Minimap. Gongmu was already standing by the security guard who had called his boss to ask if he had scheduled a power check for today, since the lights had suddenly gone out in the office. Dominic apparently didn't like being disturbed for nothing and ordered the guard to go and check what was going on. Except that when he was about to do so, he was slapped hard in the face by the brunette. The man did not want to harm his opponent, so as soon as he lost consciousness, he tied him up and locked him in a room. Gongmu was in Dominic's office, and at this very moment, Jay began to suspect that there was something wrong with the whole situation, because it was too simple and easy. Because if you think about it, Dominic wasn't a stupid guy, and there wasn't a single trap. In the meantime, the brunette had already reached the safe and was directly instructed to take everything quickly and leave for good. Jay wasn't fooled about Gongmu. He knew that this kind of work wasn't for him, because he was too responsible and kind, and that's probably why he decided to squeeze all the juice out of him. Yes, Gongmu was always giving him a hard time because he didn't like the way his boss worked, but he didn't know a more efficient person. But it was time to replace him because he often behaved as he pleased. Gongmu opened the safe and didn't know what to do, as there was not just one red diamond, but 3. It was the setup of the century, as Jay couldn't tell so immediately if they were real or fake after all. Jay thought for a moment and asked the brunette to take everything in the safe. Gongmu obediently put the things in his backpack, but then he noticed that there was a gun in there and took it too. Things got even worse from there, as Dominic's car had already pulled up to the office and the young man was still in the office. There was no way out, no way back through the hallway. So the only option left was to try to leave through the window. Jay promised he'd wait for him downstairs and bring the car around. There was no more time to ponder, as Dominic was already outside the office and had found the bound guard, which meant he was about to enter here as well. The door to the study was locked, but Dominic kicked it open with his foot and caught the brunette preparing to go out the window. But he thought too long and froze halfway out. Gongmu decided to make a move and aimed his own gun, which he took out of the safe at the bandits. But the most interesting thing was that instead of taking the shot, the guy took it and threw it right at Dominic's face and hit him right in the bullseye, smashing his nose. Somehow magically, Gongmu managed to escape and finish the job, yet he still couldn't recover as he realized that this time his death was near. After all, that day he was running as fast as he had ever run in his life, because at that moment the only thought in his head was survival. Plus, Jay was a nasty driver and almost got them killed. Dominic's people had seen his face, which meant he could be hunted at any time. And then there was the strange message from who knows who. Meanwhile, Jay was busy checking the diamonds. After analyzing them, he realized that it was a quality, conscientious fake. Gongmu sat watching his employer and realized that his reaction to the news was extremely calm, as if he already knew it all. The brunette had hoped that this was the end of their cooperation, but apparently he was badly mistaken, and the matter had become more complicated. But he decided to leave the issue with T.O. for an appetizer. The guys left the workshop and Gongmu asked what it all meant. Jay didn't know yet, but he realized he needed time to gather more information. The brunette didn't have the money to rent a new apartment, so he asked to stay at Jay's warehouse, hoping he'd get some rest, but no such luck. Gongmu quietly practiced and decided to drink some water, but was almost choked by a colleague's unexpected question, who asked him if he knew Yante-O. The name of the guy's lover popped up for a reason, as the red diamond was put up in a secret auction for the rich and bought by the Janssen Group. Gongmu got a new assignment from Jay. He had to woo Teo to find out about the stone. The brunette was still hoping that his powers were over, but it wasn't to be, for in essence their case had failed, and they needed to remedy the situation by any means necessary. At that very moment, Jay began to realize that something was obviously wrong with his colleague, for he had first refused, and now he took the form of a cute puppy, only not to work, and they had the diamonds almost in their hands. To understand the situation, Jay decided to take the brunette's phone away from him, and when he did, he read a very interesting message from T.O., which was clearly to their advantage. A minute later, Gongmu got his phone back. He regretted both not erasing the message and getting it at all, as he wanted to quit doing both of those things. In truth, Gongmu wanted to finish meeting Teo, but the universe and Jay had decided for him, and he had to come to the meeting with the blonde man, and he was smiling strangely, giving the impression of a double day. The brunette also thought that this red diamond was drifting somewhere in the black market ocean, but it ended up in the hands of the Janssen Group. Meanwhile, dinner had started, The guys were poured red wine, and Teo decided to be the first to break the silence. He said that he called the young man here to apologize to him personally for the misunderstanding that happened that morning. As an apology, Gongmu received a key card to a room in this hotel. He could spend the night there tonight, and if he liked everything, he could use it indefinitely. Gongmu liked the gift, but he realized that his interlocutor was unlikely to do something for nothing. Nevertheless, he didn't ask about it directly, instead inquiring about the man's health after that night. The blonde man was more than fine, but Gongmu really wanted to punch him, but decided to play doormat for the cause. So he said that he helped the man not for a gift, but because his heart told him to. The most interesting thing was that they had met for the first time a month ago, but their short dialogue had only impressed the blonde, so he had wanted to talk to his guest longer since then. Gongmu also remembered that meeting, but they had only spoken a few words, so it was a revelation to him that Teo remembered it. Moreover, Teo regretted not recognizing the brunette's name the first time they met, because if he did, that misunderstanding between them wouldn't have happened. Meanwhile, Gongmu had a second glass of wine and was about to set up a third, as Teo said that if the guy liked parties, he could take him out for a few. Now that was suspicious, and the brunette didn't know if that would be a good idea or a bad one. Dinner was over, and the young men went upstairs to a room that was quite large. Teo reminded his guest that he could use the room as much as he wanted. The brunette was surprised, as it was the first time in his life he was thanked in such a way. Meanwhile, his companion said that if the guy had any questions or problems, he could turn to the hotel staff, give his name, and everything would be solved quickly. Suddenly, on the way out of the elevator, a mishap happened to Gongmu because of the wine he drank. He tripped and almost fell, but the blonde man was able to pick him up easily and prevent him from kissing the floor. Alcohol really is a terrible thing, for if it hadn't been for him, perhaps the brunette would have refused the major's offer to escort him to his room, and so quietly followed him like a sheep to the slaughter, noting that they were on the top floor. Besides, this was where they had been the last time they had met, and T.O. had opened the room's doors with a master key. The room was more than luxurious. In addition, Gongmu, to tell the truth, tired of sleeping on the floor. And here everything is beautiful, cleaned, comfortable, in a word, a sin to refuse. Only this room was painfully similar to the one where they had spent the night together. The brunette's mind immediately conjured up funny images, and he started to feel nauseous. Luckily, the alarm was false, and it was a completely different room. The young men also agreed that if the mood and time permitted, they would attend a few parties together, after which they shook hands and said goodbye. Teo's behavior was somewhat ambivalent. Nevertheless, he left and said he would call the brunette a little later. After finishing the meeting, Gongmu called Jay. The man thought that this time they were lucky, and the guy should stay at that hotel and get closer to Teo and get the information he needed from him. On the one hand, our agent 008 was certainly tense about the whole situation. But on the other hand, for the first time in a long time, he felt the pleasure to lie on a normal bed, because all the time to sleep on the floor was still a test of strength. Gongmu did not change his habits and watched the blonde man today, and realized that he was hiding a slyness behind his politeness. Gongmu studied the blonde man's dossier. Yes, he was always the center of attention at parties, but there were no scandals in his personal life. But Jay managed to dig up something, and now the guy understood that he was being wooed and seduced by such gifts. We could have ignored it, but our agent 008 decided to pretend to take the bait as he was bound hand and foot by his job. Meanwhile, Teo was talking to Sona. They had an agreement about business and meetings. The sister was even somewhat surprised at her brother's eagerness to work today. The man regarded the work meeting as a minor nuisance that could easily be eliminated. But what he came across by chance was far more interesting. And that interesting one was Cha Gong-mu, as the legal department found virtually nothing about him, because the guy didn't do social media, and the company he worked for was essentially a ghost company. The parties they got into together were pretty easy to get into, but the brunette wasn't looking for dating there. Every time this guy sat at the bar all alone, drinking and watching everyone, which said he had a specific goal in mind. So Teo's curiosity was piqued, and he decided to take matters into his own hands and find out everything and more about this strange guy. A few days passed, and Teo took Gongmu with him to one of the parties as promised. The man was the center of attention. Everyone wanted to discuss with him, or advertising, or participation in advertising. The brunette felt not just uncomfortable, but maximally uncomfortable in this strangely obnoxious environment. At the moment when the blonde wanted to touch Gongmu's shoulder, one of his acquaintances swooped in and asked him if he had heard of Crystal, a question that caught the brunette's attention. Those O was not interested, but his friends carefully told him that the girl's sponsor has some problems and his office is very turbulent. And they also talked about the fact that he was robbed. But he did not go to the police, but behaves like a real bandit. A pretty girl from their company thought that Crystal and her kind behaved too defiantly because they did not belong among them, jumped out of the mud, and acted like kings of life. Our agent 008 could hardly control his facial expression at such news, as he did not expect that there were rumors about his former objects in this circle. So to recover, he washed his face with cold water. He didn't like the attitude of the golden youth to him. He didn't come here to make friends, but such an obvious ignoring of his specialty pissed him off. Just as Gongmu was about to leave the restroom, a guy from the party approached him with a request. Shaitan assumed that their new acquaintance was uncomfortable in their company, as he knew absolutely none of them and was seeing them for the first time. And then he made a bold statement, calling Gongmu as Taeo's lover. The brunette wasn't burning to comment on such a thing in any way, and the guy then didn't understand at all what was going on, since if it wasn't true, the whole situation didn't make sense. This conversation was starting to get on Gongmu's nerves, and he said that in any case, it was not about his interlocutor, and since it was, he wanted to leave this room. Further on, the whole story began to resemble a theater of the absurd, as the brown man stopped our agent 008 and offered to spend a few nights with him together. The brunette was starting to get angry as that guy started groping him and telling him that he cherishes his partners. And yes, he has a weakness for everything Teo had tried before. Gongmu wanted to break the insolent man's naughty limb, but he decided that he would stop with the threats for now, and said that he was uncomfortable with the new acquaintance's actions, and his proposal was not worth a minute of his attention. Shaitan had already begun to experience the delights of Gongmu's steel grip, and at that moment, Tae-oh entered the restroom and caught a glimpse of this curious scene. Gongmu let Dan go, even though he wanted to hurt him even more, but the brown-haired man was trying his luck, saying that the guy had a complicated character. At that very minute, Tae-oh came up to Dan and quietly told him that in any other situation, he wouldn't have paid attention to his acquaintance's prank. But now was not the case. The guy understood everything from the first time. Dan was the first one back to the party, though the brunette didn't really want to go there. He said they should go too, but Tae-oh stopped him and suggested they just walk off into the sunset. The man was upset because he wanted to prepare a fun party for his new friend. And it turned out to be something not fun at all, but tedious. He felt a little guilty, so he invited the brunette to stop by his house for a visit. So Gongmu was tempted by the offer and drove in Taeo's sports car to his house, thinking it was a great opportunity to do a tour of someone else's house. The young man saw perfectly well that the blonde was attracted to him, but he persuaded himself that perhaps he had imagined it and was running ahead of the locomotive. Mr. Yang remarked that Mr. Chan was too thoughtful, and the brunette replied that he didn't understand why the man was being so nice to him. The latter replied immediately that he was his new crush. The other question was whether or not Tae-oh liked the brunette even a little bit. Gongmu decided to go roundabout and said that there wasn't a person in this country who wasn't curious to know anything about Tae. Oh, he was no exception to the rule. It was not exactly what the blonde wanted to hear, so there was an awkward silence in the car, and our agent 008 began to feel very embarrassed by the aggravated situation. With such tension, they arrived at Taeo's house and started to get out of the cramped car into the parking lot. In the elevator, they also rode in silence. It was all as strange as possible. Nevertheless, Gongmu hoped that nothing unusual would happen between them at this rate. But when they got to the right floor and reached the door of the apartment, something interesting happened. Tae-oh kissed Gongmu gently on the forehead. They entered the apartment, stood looking at each other for a minute, and then an innocent, tender kiss on the forehead abruptly turned into a passionate French kiss. The young men had not kissed on their first night together, so now the brunette was highly impressed, as his partner was a master of this. Tae-oh started to get very active, and Gongmu realized at that moment that he didn't care about anything as long as the man didn't stop. And he promised to shower his baby with affection this time, because last time he was too rough because of the substances. The man decided to confirm his words with actions, so now looking at Gongmu, he realized how cute and beautiful the guy was after his caresses. But it was more gentle in the beginning. And then the soul went to paradise until the morning. The sun had already risen, and Teo did not even sleep a wink and looked at his exhausted partner with a smile, realizing that he is still not enough. But the brunette immediately woke up when he realized that he was waiting for another round. He couldn't do it anymore, but the blonde wanted to and could. Gongmu was resigned to the fact that his voice didn't count in this matter, so he just took everything for granted already. Besides, there wasn't the slightest bit of guilt in the blonde man's voice for being rude. Teo admitted that this was his way of trying to get to know Gongmu, since he doesn't know anything about him other than what's written on his business card. So now he's still aware of the guy's body capabilities and stamina. The young men finally satisfied their desires. The brunette was partially dressed and standing by the window. He noted that the view was magnificent. But now when Gongmu looked at Teo, he realized that this man was very unusual. When they were in bed, he was a real tyrant and beast. But in little things, like sleeping or ordinary things, he turned into a real caring angel. By and large, the guy didn't understand what he was doing, why he had come here, though he realized that this would be the end of it, so he wanted to smoke. He was beginning to shake with anxiety, for it was the first time in his life that things had taken such a turn. For yesterday, he had come here of his own free will and had done what he had done at night. No one had forced him to do it, and he was not drunk either, so he found no excuse for his behavior. Afterward, he checked his phone. There were no calls or messages. It was strange, especially considering Jay's personality, and here he wasn't even asking to report the situation. While Teo was asleep, the brunette decided to look around the apartment, because yesterday he had not had time to do so and had only seen the bedroom. Now he decided to go through all the rooms, and he would be lucky if the diamonds were in plain sight. The first thing that caught his eye was that the house itself was huge, but the rooms in it were small, and it was also quite cozy, indicating that the owner spent a lot of time here. Gongmu didn't expect such a thing from the blonde, as he spent a lot of time at parties. But there was something else that didn't give him peace. But he decided to think about it later. But the moment Gongmu reached into the man's stash, the man woke up, got dressed, and approached the brunette, closing the stash and asking the man what he was looking for here. We should have kept a better eye on the situation, so now our agent 008 was trying to justify himself, saying that he couldn't resist and wanted to look around such a beautiful and big house. Teo decided to play his game and not focus his attention on it, and then added that the brunette had promised him an entertaining and truthful account of himself during the night. Plus, he was trying to make Gongmu feel guilty, because he felt a little sad and hurt when his partner, who he spends the night with, took off to look around his house. Gongmu felt dizzy after saying that, because he didn't immediately realize that they were really partners, even though they had only spent 2 nights together. But he didn't feel guilty because the blonde man was the most awake. The start was made and the guys started doing other things. First, they took turns showering. Teo even lent his clothes to Gongmu. Moreover, he cooked a mouth-watering breakfast and served it to his partner. Frankly speaking, the brunette was delighted with everything he saw in front of him, as the blonde had almost no time for cooking and serving. And here was such beauty. The young men began to eat breakfast. Teo did not take offense at Gongmu, who thought him incapable of such gestures, for he himself knew very well that he had a reputation as a party king, not a homebody. But Teo didn't want to talk about himself, but about the brunette, and the guy had to tell that he doesn't cook often and not that tasty, only to not starve. He probably doesn't have any hobbies, but you could say that he likes to walk without a purpose. It was like a first date questionnaire, but all of Gongmu's answers were lies, because he didn't really know how to cook at all, and he could only heat up what was ready, and once he almost burned down Jay's kitchen. And most of all, he loved just lying on his bed in silence, especially when Jay was swamping him with various work assignments. But these were not the last questions. Yes, the man didn't ask about what the brunette was looking for in his house, but he was interested in little things, like how he liked to eat eggs more, whether he was older or younger than him. It was hard to understand what was in the blonde's mind at this very moment. At this very time, Crystal was out shopping with her girlfriends and complaining to her uncle that he had stopped helping her at all lately. From everything Dominic had told her, the girl realized that the guy who had robbed him had attended a recent party of Elle's shareholders. She couldn't understand who she was talking about at once, so she asked for photos and then recognized the tall brunette who had helped Mr. Yang not long ago. Meanwhile, the young people had finished breakfast. Gongmu became very awkward as this class turned into a first date with a series of questions and answers. Our agent 008 was well aware that he and T.O. had been brought together by the search for the red diamond. If it hadn't been for him, they would never have met. So he didn't realize if this handsome man liked his answers. Gongmu couldn't help but stare at the blonde man. He tried to understand what was in the blonde man's mind, but it was impossible. Besides, he was sure that after the first night and they wouldn't have a repeat. But now, he felt that the blonde man was more sincere than him. But that was all lyrical. Now it was time to sort things out, and Gongmu said that earlier he had walked home without a purpose and accidentally peeked into the trophy stash. He hoped the man wasn't mad at him for this oversight. It turned out that the blonde deliberately hid all his trophies because everyone around knew that he ended his racing career quite suddenly. Then he won his first championship and was at the peak of his powers. But he had to quit. Many believed he did it because of contract issues. Others believed it was a mental health issue. But it was actually much more complicated than that. But if you had to pick one thing, the audience prize had to go to family issues. Teo realized and knew full well that there was a man in his family who had a huge influence on him and felt that his value should come from somewhere other than the track. The blonde man had a hard time answering honestly, so he decided to change not only the topic, but also the setting by inviting Gongmu to go for a walk with him. But this wasn't supposed to be a casual stroll, but a very real romantic date for the two of them. So they went to a clothing store and started trying on a bunch of different clothes. Teo picked out a few looks for himself. The rest he wanted Gongmu to try on. The young man realized that his partner was rich, but he was afraid to even imagine how much money he now spent on the new clothes the salesgirls were packing for him. Only now did Gongmu begin to understand what movie couples experienced when one of them was trying on clothes and the other was judging it, because now he was having a lot of fun in the process. After shopping, the young men went for a cup of coffee at a sidewalk cafe, and Teo was glad that Gongmu was keeping him company today. At this point, the man received a phone call from someone. He couldn't ignore the call, so he apologized to his partner and decided to step back to answer it. The brunette watched Mr. Yang closely and realized that the call was important, but hardly pleasant, as a shadow came over the man's face, which meant someone in his family was calling. The only thing the brunette realized well, looking at the man's straight back, was that his position in the Janssen group wasn't as loose as everyone around him thought. After a couple minutes, Teo approached Gongmu and apologized to him for having to leave him alone now, as he had some business to attend to that he couldn't put off. The young men decided to reschedule their date and conversation for another time and call each other. And now it was time for both of them to go. Gongmu said he didn't need to call a driver as he could drive himself home, realizing that the man shouldn't find out this information. Even though the brunette was dizzy from everything that had happened, and as much as he enjoyed it, it was time to get back to Jay and work. Except Fate had other plans and he was approached by Crystal, who was sure the brunette knew exactly who she was. A few days ago, the girl went to visit her uncle, but he wasn't in the office. So she decided to ask his men what they were up to this time. The guys in black suits were in no hurry to tell her their business, since the boss had ordered them to keep quiet. But such an answer did not satisfy the girl. At that moment, she turned from a sweet beauty into a crazy fury, who took an axe in her hands and began to destroy everything around her, knowing that nothing will happen to her for this. And all because the guys did not answer her question. Since the guys didn't want to suffer any more material losses, and they knew very well that this girl could make their lives difficult, told her everything from beginning to end. Right now, Crystal and Gongmu were sitting across from each other, and the guy acknowledged that they had seen each other at a recent party. The beauty, on the other hand, thought they could have dropped the formalities since it wasn't just at parties that they saw each other. But the guy flashed a photo in her uncle's office. Mr. Chan decided to pretend that he didn't know what he was talking about, since he knew the girl as an opinion leader of the younger generation. But she wasn't going to listen to such nonsense for long. Crystal lived her life trying to ignore the rumors that hovered around her thanks to Dominic's reputation. But she was never an idiot. And Gongmu realized that this girl was scarier and more dangerous than her uncle. Crystal was sick of this one-goal game. She knew he was the one who robbed her uncle's office, and also guessed that the red diamond was his target. So he ignorantly stole the counterfeits from the safe. Now Mr. Chan was nervous and wanted to leave, but the girl stopped him and said that it would be better for him to answer when she called him, for she had not yet told him that the guy who had thrown the gun at him was him. Realizing his predicament, Gongmu asked Crystal for his contact information, but a chill went down his spine when she said she already knew his contact information. The pretty girl withdrew, reminding the guy that he'd better answer when she called if he didn't want trouble. At which point it was clear that the matter had turned on its heel for him and Jay. For this girl was not a naive rich princess, but a worthy niece of her uncle. After all this, Gongmu came to Jay's house. They started talking, and the employer was happy that the brunette had been to Taeo's house, but angry that he only found out about it now. That was the pleasant part of the conversation. And next, our agent 008 decided to tell Jay about the problem in Crystal's face. Jay wasn't just angry when he found out that the girl had found out Gongmu's identity. He was really pissed off because the perfect plan and the case was falling apart in front of his eyes. It was clear that things were bad, because now Gongmu needed to find an approach to the girl as well, and Jay hoped that he could do it. Gongmu realized that he couldn't handle Crystal, and he didn't want to be a gigolo, so for some reason he started to stare at Jay, imagining him with a girl. Crystal, on the other hand, seemed a bit out of place to the brunette, so he doubted she would make contact with him, so the best option was to continue meeting with Taeo, even though they had a double bottom. Now even the great Jay felt a certain amount of guilt for not considering every possible scenario, and now the girl was a problem in their plan. He assumed she was just bait, but it could have been anything. Meanwhile, Taeo was having lunch with his older sister Ra-on, who was able to cross paths with him for the first time in a long time. Everything that was going on right now was hard to call an ordinary dinner of an ordinary family, but Seona was doing a great job of pretending not to notice anything around her. The woman demanded that her brother and sister eat well and enjoy the process, and then added that she was surprised that they couldn't get together at the same table all this time. Teo smiled and replied that he had been running her errands all this time. That's why he was busy. Rotwan thought that the problem with her younger brother's behavior was hiding in his resentment, though she didn't understand why, since he had abandoned his team on his own, but continued to act as if everyone was against him. The moment the man was ready to explode with anger and indignation, he was stopped by Sona, who realized that his words and actions would backfire on him. Seona, on the other hand, asked her sister to get to the heart of the matter they had gathered for. Ra-on was even surprised at her activity, but it was true. She had a job for Teo, an emotionless family. Whether that was actually the case, Teo didn't know, but he sat as if in a vacuum listening to his sisters talk about work, and it was far from the first time. He melancholy to her, realizing that he wasn't listening to his sisters at all, so he flinched a little when the older sister addressed him. She hoped he remembered well what she said. Besides, she was already aware of the recent events around him. Rotwan thought that all problems should be solved quietly and not make a show like her brother. Nevertheless, she hoped that he would show himself adequately at the event, except that the man thought that his status was not quite suitable, and it would be better if his sister did everything herself. But this time, even Sona didn't help him turn away, as the girl knew her brother's schedule by heart and that it was completely free, and this event was a great opportunity to show off. Ra'an was silent for now and didn't comment on what was happening, but still she always had the last word and said she was waiting for a report from the man about the work done. This was far from the first time the family had pressured Teo into doing something. Starting from childhood, all his actions were strictly controlled. His mother never saw him as a human being. To her, he was just a tool in achieving her goals like many other people. Did he want to be a model child? Unlikely, but that's what his mother wanted. As a child, he tried to fulfill all her requests and wishes, just so she would pay a little of her attention to him and fulfill at least one of her promises. But the praise was always only lip service, and there was no mom as such in his life. He desperately wanted to spend time with his mother and sisters, but he always had an empty house and maids at his disposal. No one else, for even his sister's interest in him had gradually faded. As he grew up, he realized that it was hard to call them a family, and he was distant from them. However, over time, So-na began to talk to him little by little on distracted topics. But even she, in those rare moments, had always looked at him with eyes full of pity, and now she smoked to hide her anger and resentment. Ra'an left, and So-na and Teo looked after her. The man didn't understand why his sister had told the older woman about his recent incident, except that she hadn't said anything and the older woman was watching them all. Tae-oh hadn't noticed that Seo-na was so fond of the older woman before, but she said that she was greedy and didn't want to make an enemy of Ra-an, who was a copy of their mother. Nevertheless, she was also not a finger and hoped that her finest hour would come soon and asked her brother to do what he was asked for now and not cause trouble. Seo-na also asked her brother, while the opportunity arose to be a douche with their sister, to gain her trust and support, and then perhaps his situation in their family would change. The blonde decided he'd better agree, as he was intimidated greatly by all the women in his family. A few days passed. Gongmu lay on the couch and checked his phone every second. But there were no calls or messages, not from Crystal, not from Jay, not from Tae-oh, and he wasn't the kind of person who would write first. Though the brunette wondered why everyone had abruptly started to ignore him, there was a silver lining. For the first time in a long time, he was able to get some sleep. And at that very moment, he got a call from Tae-oh. It was unexpected. And before answering the call, the guy even dropped the phone from his hands. The blonde made a second date with him, and they went to watch the sunset near the sea. The picture was really beautiful and mesmerizing. Tae-oh confessed that he had found this place long ago and came here often, for it was beautiful, quiet, and a place to gather his thoughts. And every trip here made him at least a little bit happy. The young men stood in silence for a long time, and then the blonde admitted that he had been waiting all these days for our agent 008 to write a couple of lines to him. But he was probably very busy. The brunette's face spoke for itself. It hadn't even crossed his mind to write first, so he didn't look for other excuses and said that he was really busy. Tae-oh looked sad. He admitted that he had too much on his plate since the last time they had met, and it was obvious that the Thai cases were not to his liking. That was the reason the man couldn't text the brunette earlier. But now he breathed out a sigh of relief and was ready to remedy the situation. Gongmu watched his partner closely, and then said that he didn't see anything wrong with changing things spontaneously, because it was always good for the cause. Tae-oh suddenly remembered that their first conversation and meeting had also taken place at a party near the river, and although Gongmu pretended not to remember it, it was clear as day that it wasn't true. The brunette, of course, remembered everything that had happened then, but decided now to make a move, and said that then he saw in front of him a very charming man with whom he dreamed of getting acquainted. He also admitted that he'd had too much to drink that night, and might have said too much. But Tae-oh was happy now, as he was very happy to hear it all. That night, Gongmu had somehow miraculously managed to get to the river party, but he had missed his goal and had almost failed. So he went out to get some air and think about his behavior. He'd had a lot to drink, and realized it was time to call it a day if he didn't want to make more mistakes. That was when he saw the blonde man on the balcony. Tae-oh was very handsome in his perfect white shirt, and Gongmu had the brilliant idea in his drunken brain to walk over and talk to the man. And the first thing that came to the brunette's mind was the assumption that Tae-oh wasn't having any fun there at all. But the strange thing was that he wasn't going home either, probably waiting for someone. At that moment, the blonde suddenly realized that this drunk guy on the balcony was trying to seduce him so clumsily. But because of his handsome face, the man forgave him everything. That very night, Tae-oh first wanted to leave the party with Gongmu specifically, but then his friends came over and thwarted his plan to seduce the brunette. And while he was distracted by his friends, he noticed that the stranger had disappeared in an obscure direction, and he was already standing alone near the railing on the balcony. Now, Tae-oh admitted that Gongmu had actually managed to seduce him that night and was going to leave with him. But as soon as he made that decision, the guy was gone, which was why the brunette didn't want to remember that night. It was evening, and Gongmu wanted to listen to what happened at Tae-oh's place. For the man looked sad. The man suddenly asked him what he would do if all his deeds and endeavors were devalued, and the future looked very sad and dreary under the pressure of other people. And this was interesting, because in this way our agent 008 could characterize his whole life. Remembering everything he had done up to that point, the guy said that if things looked like this, he should drop everything and start his life from scratch and try to do better than the last time. It is clear that it will not be easy, but the light at the end of the tunnel will still appear. Well, and if a wall appears on the way to the light, it will have to be broken through and move on. Tae-oh did not expect his partner to be so temperamental. In life, you can't do it any other way, because everyone wants to succeed and succeed. So to survive, you need to sharpen your claws and strengthen your fists, and maybe in time things will be better than they were, and you can stop running. Only now did Teo realize that Gongmu was being honest with him and was not speaking in the abstract, but personally about himself. The funniest thing was that it happened today, at this very moment. Although on one hand it was more fun because he couldn't pretend to believe in the brunette's legends forever. But the surprising thing was that it was Gongmu who had to comfort him now. The young people were about to drive home, but something as usual did not go according to plan, and instead of getting in the car, they started kissing. Gongmu thought that he had said something unnecessary, and it ruined his partner's mood even more. But now, looking into his eyes, he was drowning and didn't understand anything, because in front of him was the most beautiful and mysterious man in the world. And then he gave in to the impulse of feeling and made the first move that Teo didn't expect him to make. He kissed him first, for he hadn't just come here to see the river. Both young men were already into the excitement, so after breaking the kiss, Teo looked down, then into the brunette's eyes, and offered to go to his place since they both wanted to continue. They arrived at Teo's house and moved to the couch in the living room. It was clear that today the blonde was in a strange mood and was more insistent in caresses than usual. And Gongmu, though accidentally, but provoked his partner to more radical actions. Today had been a day and night of discovery for the two of them, as Gongmu had not only opened up emotionally to Teo by telling a little truth about himself, but also now that he had taken the initiative in their intimacy. However, that time they finished earlier than usual. Gongmu took a shower and collapsed on the bed in a star pose as his whole body was aching and sore. After a couple minutes, Teo came into the room. After a shower, he looked like he was on the cover of a housewives magazine. He had been looking after himself all his life. That's why he was so beautiful, and he loved it when people and the brunette looked at him with bated breath. Teo admitted that many people demanded him to publish a personal video of obscene content. Plus, people called his family a lioness den, and his the only prince of the lioness den. It looked absurd from the outside, but the blonde man had always acted as a tool for his family to attract the public's attention, no more and no less. It hadn't really mattered to him before, but lately he'd been troubled by other thoughts. But he didn't voice them and suggested that Gongmu just sleep for a while. But Gongmu wasn't sleeping. He got up and started making a copy of his partner's phone, just like Jay had asked. A wiretap installed in every room, too. For a moment, he even felt sympathy for the blonde, but it was a fleeting doubt. The day before the trip to the river, when Teo called him, he dressed in a flash and ran to meet the man like a teenager on a first date to the queen of the school. The problem was that the brunette was beginning to realize that Teo was a completely different person, not as others saw him, and his problems, which seemed to be the whims of a rich man, resonated in Gongmu's heart, even though he denied it. When he had free time, the brunette reviewed all the videos with Teo and realized that he almost never got into scandals. And besides, he was honest with him from the beginning, so he couldn't figure out if he was doing the right thing by continuing to dig at him. At this very moment, a man approached the brunette. He was already used to the fact that when he woke up, the guy was not around, but it still made him sad. Besides, he was watching videos of his performances on the track. The video kept refusing to turn on, but when it did, there was silence in the apartment. And then Teo kicked his partner out of the apartment without explanation. A few days passed. Teo not only didn't call or text, but also didn't reply to Gongmu's messages. The latter didn't understand at all what had happened that night. What was wrong with that video? Gongmu was about to get some work done, but at that moment, Jay came home and fell onto the bed with his shoes on, as the brunette had given him more work to do. But Gongmu didn't go out either, and he wasn't very good at gaining people's trust. So he decided to call and set up a meeting with Dan to find out more about Teo.